In the shadow of towering mesas, where ancient spirits whisper through sacred canyons, dwells Kiona, an Apache maiden, whose wisdom flows like water, but whose small frame invites ridicule. When her betrothed abandons her before their joining ceremony, the tribe sees only shame where once stood promise. Yet the ancestors stir, their voices carrying across the vast desert to Nantan-Gahas, a giant whose massive hands have known only exile. Guided by visions, this gentle colossus begins to carve each thunderous blow, transforming sandstone into a monument to the woman he has never met. As his chisel strikes echo through the canyons, even the sleeping deities begin to awaken. Can strength born of tenderness reshape what generations of tradition have deemed immutable? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the Apache village, painting the red canyon walls in hues of amber and gold. Inside her wickiup, Kiona stirred from dreams filled with healing herbs and ancient songs. Though the sun had barely crested the horizon, her small hands were already sorting through the contents of her medicine pucha deerskin bag, containing remedies that only her keen eyes could find in places others overlooked. At 20 summers, Kiona stood barely taller than the village children, her head reaching only to most warriors' chests. Yet what she lacked in stature, she made up for in presence. Her eyes, dark as obsidian and just as reflective, missed nothing. Her fingers, nimble and precise, could extract thorns that others couldn't even see. Little one, her grandmother had called her, not as others did with mockery, but with reverence. The smallest plants often carry the strongest medicine. Kiona remembered those words each time the warriors' glances slid over her, as though she were invisible, or when the taller women whispered behind their hands as she passed. Her grandmother had been the tribe's medicine woman before her, and had recognized in Kiona a gift for healing that transcended her physical limitations. "Your size is no accident," the old woman had told her. "The spirits made you small so you could listen more closely to their whispers." And listen she did. While other girls learned to weave baskets and prepare food, Kiona had spent hours in the canyons, learning the language of plants, the habits of healing snakes, the cycles of the moon that governed when certain roots should be harvested. Now, as the youngest medicine woman in the tribe's memory, she commanded a respect that was begrudging from some, genuine from others. The elders valued her knowledge. The mothers brought their sick children. The hunters sought her poultices for their wounds. But respect was not the same as acceptance. Outside her wickiup, the village was already stirring. Women tended morning fires. Children carried water, and somewhere among them walked Taklishim, her betrothed, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that could break a wild horse or draw a bow with equal skill. The match had surprised everyone, herself included. The son of a respected hunter, choosing the smallest woman in the tribe. Some called it kindness, others whispered it was pity. Kiona had dared to hope it was love. Lately, though, she had caught his gaze following Nara, a woman newly arrived from a neighboring band. Nara stood tall and strong, with arms accustomed to grinding corn all day without tiring. Her laugh was loud, her steps sure. Everything Kiona was not. "You will bring the fever medicine to Morning Star's son." Her mother's voice came from outside the wickiup entrance, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, mother, the willow bark has steeped all night." "And you have prepared your joining garments? 3 days is not much time." "They are nearly ready," Kiona replied, though in truth she had finished them weeks ago. A deerskin dress adorned with beads as small as raindrops, each one positioned to tell the story of healing and strength. A dress meant to honor both her past and her future. "Taklishim's mother has been speaking with the council," her mother continued, her voice carefully neutral. "She has concerns." Kiona's hands stilled over her medicines. "What concerns?" "A warrior needs strong sons." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Not for the first time, Kiona felt the weight of judgment on her narrow shoulders. In the tribe's eyes, her gift for healing did not compensate for what they perceived as physical weakness. She lifted her chin, meeting her mother's worried gaze. "The strength of our children will come from both their father's body and their mother's spirit." Her mother nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "I will tell Taklishim you will meet him at the sunset prayer." As her mother's footsteps faded, Kiona returned to her medicines, carefully pouring the willow bark tea into a small clay vessel. Outside, she could hear the rhythms of village life continuing steady and predictable as the rise and fall of the sun. Yet something in her bones told her that this rhythm was about to change. Miles away across the desert, where the sacred canyons narrowed into passages known only to the most daring, Nantan-Gahas awoke in his solitary cave as the first light touched the eastern sky. His massive frame barely fit in the space he had carved for himself years ago, when his hands were still smooth and his heart less heavy. Nantan sat up, his head nearly brushing the cave ceiling. At his feet lay the broken pieces of his war club, its handle shattered during the incident that had driven him from his people. He kept it not as a weapon but as a reminder strength unchecked becomes destruction. Even as a child, Nantan had towered over others. By his 10th summer, he stood taller than most grown men. By his 15th, he was a giant among his people, his shoulders broad as a buffalo's, his arms thick as young trees. The elders had seen his size as a blessing from the ancestors, a sign that he would become a great warrior and protector. And for a time, he had been. His enormous strength allowed him to hunt game that others could not bring down, to carry loads that would require 3 normal men, to defend the tribe against enemies who fled at the mere sight of him. Nantan-Gahas, they called him Big Leader. Children would follow him in awe, warriors would seek his counsel in battle, maidens would offer him shy glances. Until the day of the strength contest. The memory still visited him in dreams. The annual celebration, the tests of skill and power, the cheers of the tribe as he effortlessly lifted stones that no other man could budge. And then the challenge from Kichi, a warrior from another band, eager to prove himself. "Let us see who can throw the heaviest spear the farthest," Kichi had suggested, his eyes gleaming with competitive fire. Nantan could still feel the weight of the war club in his hands, the surge of power in his arms as he demonstrated his throw. Could still hear the sickening crack as the club slipped from his grasp, flying sideways instead of forward, striking Kichi directly in the chest. Could still see the young warrior's body crumpling, life leaving his eyes before he hit the ground. It had been an accident, everyone knew this, but the fear that followed was real. Whispers spread through the tribe like wind through dry grass. If Nantan could kill a warrior with an errant throw, what might happen if he truly lost his temper? What if he became angry during a hunt, or a child irritated him? "The spirits gave him too much strength for our safety," the elders had concluded. They did not banish him officially, that would have been cruel. Instead, they suggested he undertake a vision quest, to seek guidance from the ancestors about his unusual power. Nantan understood the unspoken message beneath their words. "Do not return until you can guarantee our safety." So he had wandered, eventually finding this remote canyon where few Apache ever ventured. Here, among the towering rock formations and hidden springs, he had created a solitary life. He hunted only what he needed, gathered plants for food and medicine, and spent his days carving massive sculptures from the soft sandstone cliffs, great eagles, running horses, ancient spirits artwork that no human eyes would ever see. His only companions were the canyon creatures, the golden eagles that nested on the highest ledges, the deer that came to drink at his spring, the wolves that sometimes sat at a respectful distance while he worked, as if studying his technique. After 7 years of exile, Nantan had made peace with his solitude. Or so he told himself, as he rose from his sleeping mat, ducking to exit his cave into the pink light of dawn. Yet lately, something had disturbed his hard-won tranquility. Dreams, more vivid than any he'd experienced since childhood, had begun visiting him. In them, he saw a woman small as a child, but with eyes ancient as the stars sweeping beside an empty basket. He shook his head, trying to dislodge the image. Dreams were just dreams, he told himself, echoes of his own loneliness, nothing more. The sun hung low in the western sky as Kiona finished the final stitches on her ceremonial blanket. For months, she had woven her hopes into this joining blanket, each pattern a prayer, each color a promise. Tomorrow, she and Taklishim would stand before the tribe, wrapped together in this cloth that would symbolize their union. "It is beautiful," said her aunt, who had come to help with the final preparations. "Such tiny, perfect stitches. No one has your patience, little one." Kiona smiled at the praise, though part of her winced at the nickname that had followed her since childhood. Would she still be little one when she became a wife? Would her children bear the same burden of smallness? Outside, the women of the tribe were preparing for the ritual bath that would cleanse her body and spirit before the ceremony. Already, she could smell the sacred herbs being heated over the fire, sage and juniper, cedar and sweetgrass, the sense of transition, of passage from one life into another. "Your mother has adjusted your grandmother's wedding attire," her aunt continued, holding up a deerskin dress adorned with beads and quills. "It will fit you perfectly now." The dress had been altered extensively, shortened and narrowed to accommodate Kiona's small frame. Another reminder of her difference, yet also a connection to the grandmother who had taught her the healing ways. "Taklishim will be proud to stand beside you," her aunt said, though something in her voice lacked conviction. Kiona had noticed the same hesitation in others, lately quick, glances exchanged, conversations that stopped when she approached. Even Taklishim had grown distant, finding reasons to hunt longer, to spend evenings in council rather than walking with her under the stars as they once had. After her aunt left, Kiona carefully folded the ceremonial blanket and placed it in a basket woven specifically to hold it until tomorrow. Then she stepped outside, intending to join the women for the ritual bath. But something stopped her. Voices carried on the evening breezemen's voices, coming from the council circle. One voice rose above the others, Taklishim's, strong and certain. "I cannot go through with the joining," he was saying, the words striking Kiona like physical blows. "It would not be right for our tribe." She should have turned away, should not have eavesdropped on council matters, but her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her closer to the circle of men. "You made a promise to this woman," came the chief's measured response. "Her family has prepared. The tribe expects this union." "I know." Taklishim's voice held no shame, only resolve. "But a warrior must think of future generations. Kiona is a gifted healer, but she is small. Too small to bear strong children, too fragile to endure the hardships that a warrior's wife must face." "You knew her size when you made this arrangement," said one of the elders. "I thought her medicine power would compensate." Taklishim replied, "I was wrong. Our tribe needs strength, especially now, with the Navajo pushing closer to our hunting grounds. My sons must be warriors who can defend our people." There was a long silence, during which Kiona pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle any sound that might betray her presence. "And there is another reason," Taklishim finally continued. "Nara, the woman from the pine tree band, she has agreed to join with me instead. She is strong, tall, from a line of warriors. Our children would have the strength our tribe needs." Another silence, heavier than the first. "This is not our way," the chief finally said, his voice heavy with disapproval. "But tradition also tells us that a warrior must be free to choose his path. If you are certain—" "I am." "Then it will be announced tomorrow. Instead of a joining ceremony, there will be a dissolution of promise. You will compensate Kiona's family as tradition demands." Kiona didn't wait to hear more. Backing away silently, she turned and fled into the gathering darkness, her feet carrying her to the sacred prayer rocks, where generations of Apache women had come to seek guidance in times of trial. There, alone under the first stars of evening, the smallest woman of the Apache tribe wept until there were no more tears to shed. The somber rhythm of the tribal drum pulled Kiona from fitful sleep just as dawn broke. She had spent most of the night at the prayer rocks, returning to her wickiup only when exhaustion had overcome her grief. Now, the drum's steady beat 3 slow strokes, a pause, 3 more signaled an announcement of significance. Not the joyful, rapid rhythm that would have heralded her joining day, but the measured cadence that called the tribe to witness a solemn decision. Her mother entered without speaking, her eyes red-rimmed from her own tears. In her arms, she carried not the wedding attire they had prepared, but Kiona's everyday dress and her medicine woman's sash. "You know, then," Kiona said quietly. "Word came to us after you left," her mother replied, her voice strained. "Your father argued against it in council until the moon was high. But tradition gives a warrior the right to break a promise if he believes it threatens the strength of future generations. The words, though spoken gently, cut deeply. Kiona had always known that her size made others see her as less than whole, but to have it declared a threat to the tribe's future, that was a wound that struck at her very core. "The chief has called everyone to gather," her mother continued. "You must be there. Hold your head high, daughter. Your worth is not measured by one man's fear." Kiona nodded, though conviction was hard to find. She dressed slowly, braiding her hair with fingers that felt numb, securing her medicine pouch at her waist, reminder that whatever else was taken from her today, her healing gift remained. Outside, the village had gathered in a circle around the central fire. The drum continued its solemn rhythm as Kiona and her family approached. She felt the weight of eyes upon her, some sympathetic, some curious, some quietly satisfied that the natural order was being restored. A small woman should not aspire to join with a respected warrior, their glances seemed to say. Taklishim stood tall on the far side of the circle, his face impassive. Beside him stood Nara, the woman from the pine tree banda, head high, her shoulders straight, her entire bearing a study in confident strength. Standing together, they looked like a matched pair of prized arrows, straight and true. Kiona felt smaller than ever as she took her place with her family. The drum fell silent as the chief stepped forward, his speaking staff held vertically to signify the formal nature of the gathering. "We come together to witness a change in our tribe's path," he began, his deep voice carrying easily to every ear. "The joining that was to take place between Taklishim, son of Tarak, and Kiona, daughter of Kachina, will not occur." A murmur rippled through the gathering, not of surprise, for the news had spread quickly overnight, but of collective acknowledgement. Taklishim has declared his intention to join instead with Nara of the Pine Tree Band. The chief gestured toward the tall woman, who inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. "This change has been accepted by the council, though not without debate." The chief turned slightly, his eyes finding Kiona. There was compassion there, but also resignation. "As is our way, Taklishim's family will provide compensation to Kiona's family for this broken promise. 6 horses and 2 winter robes of buffalo hide." As if physical goods could heal a broken heart, Kiona thought, though she kept her face still, refusing to show weakness before the tribe. "Kiona will continue to serve as our medicine woman, with all the respect her position deserves," the chief added, a pointed reminder to the tribe that her value extended beyond her marriageability. Several of the elder women nodded at this, their eyes offering silent support. The mothers whose children she had healed watched her with sympathy. But others, particularly the warriors and younger women, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Who would want her now? Would any man risk having children who might inherit her smallness? "The joining ceremony between Taklishim and Nara will take place when the moon is full again," the chief concluded. "Until then, we will prepare accordingly." With that, the formal announcement was complete. The drum sounded once more, a single, final beat that echoed across the village like a door closing on Kiona's former future. The crowd began to disperse, life continuing despite the alteration in its expected course. Children ran back to play, women returned to morning tasks, warriors gathered their hunting gear. Taklishim and Nara walked away together, neither looking back at the small figure standing motionless beside her family. The dream came again to Nantan-Gahas that night, more vivid than before. The small woman with ancient eyes wept by an empty basket, while around her stood shadowy figures turning away one by one. When he woke, his chest ached as though he had been the one weeping. 3 nights in a row now. The same dream growing clearer each time. Among his people, such recurring visions were not dismissed lightly. They were messages from ancestors, from spirits, perhaps from the earth itself. Nantan sat cross-legged at the mouth of his cave, watching the first light touch the highest canyon walls. The vision stones he had arranged in a small circle before him glowed with unusual warmth beneath his fingertips. 7 stones sewn for each direction, one for the earth below, one for the sky above, and one for the center where all things meet. He had avoided traditional medicine ways since his exile, feeling unworthy of the ancestors' guidance, but this persistent dream demanded attention. "I will listen," he said aloud, his deep voice echoing slightly against the canyon walls. "I will prepare the old way and open myself to understanding." Throughout the day, he gathered what he needed: sage and cedar for purification, special clay to mix with water from the sacred spring, rocks to heat for the sweat lodge he would build. By sunset, he had constructed a small dome of bent saplings covered with hides, just large enough to accommodate his enormous frame if he sat hunched forward. As twilight deepened into night, Nantan built a fire outside the lodge and placed the specially selected stones to heat. He removed his simple buckskin clothing and painted his body with traditional symbols using the sacred clay strength on his arms, vision on his forehead, protection over his heart, connection on his feet. When the stones glowed red in the fire, he used forked sticks to carry them one by one into the center of the sweat lodge. Then, naked but for a small loincloth, he crawled through the low entrance and sealed it behind him. The heat was immediate and intense. Nantan poured water onto the hot stones, filling the small space with steam that opened his pores and began to cleanse his body. He sang the old songs, remembered from childhood songs of seeking, of humility before the spirits, of openness to wisdom. "I come as a seeker," he chanted between songs. "I come to understand. I come to serve." As sweat poured from his body and his breath grew labored in the intense heat, Nantan felt the familiar shift of consciousness that preceded vision. The darkness behind his closed eyelids began to swirl with colors. His heartbeat seemed to expand until it filled the lodge, then beyond, merging with the pulse of the earth itself. And then he saw her clearly, not fragments as in his dreams, but her whole being. A woman small in stature but somehow immense in presence. Her hands moved among healing plants with intimate knowledge. Her eyes held wisdom beyond her years. And around her neck hung a medicine pouch identical to the one his own mother had worn. He saw a village surrounded by red canyon walls, similar to his own, yet different. He saw a tall warrior turning away from the small woman, taking with him her promised future. He saw her weeping at sacred stones, her tears falling onto earth that trembled in response. Then the vision shifted, and Nantan saw himself massive hands shaping stone, creating something of beauty and power. He saw the small woman standing before his creation, her grief transformed to wonder. A voice spoke then, not his own, not one he recognized, yet somehow familiar, the voice of the ancestors speaking together as one. "The smallest and the largest," the voice said, "the gentle giant and the tiny healer. Apart, you are seen as too much and too little. Together, you create balance." The vision began to fade as the heat in the lodge diminished. But before it disappeared completely, Nantan saw one final imager, massive statue of a woman, carved from living stone, standing at the entrance to a sacred canyon. At its base, the small woman and himself, hand in hand. When he finally emerged from the sweat lodge hours later, cooled his body in the spring, and returned to his cave, Nantan knew what he must do. The ancestors had given him not just a vision, but a purpose, the first he had received since his exile began. Yet doubt crept in with the dawn. Who was he to interpret visions? A man who had killed, who lived apart from his people, who had hidden from his responsibilities for 7 years. As if in answer, thunder rumbled through the clear morning sky, a sign so unusual that Nantan felt the hairs rise on his arms. Not distant thunder, but directly overhead, as though the sky itself had spoken his name. The thunder's confirmation still echoing in his ears, Nantan-Gahas began his preparations. 7 years had passed since he had ventured beyond his canyon sanctuary, 7 years since he had spoken to another human being. The prospect filled him with equal parts, purpose and dread. First, he crafted a journey staff, not a weapon, but a traveler's companion. He selected a young pine that had been felled by lightning, its wood still resinous and strong. With practiced hands, he stripped the bark and shaped the wood, his knife carving protective symbols along its length: eagle for vision, wolf for guidance, bear for strength tempered by wisdom. When finished, the staff stood as tall as an ordinary man, yet in Nantan's massive grip, it seemed appropriately scaled. Next came the practical necessities: a water skin made from a deer bladder, pemmican wrapped in leaves enough for several days, a fire-starting kit tucked into a pouch at his waist. A second knife as backup for the one he always carried. The most difficult preparation was psychological. Nantan had grown accustomed to solitude, to speaking only to the canyon winds and the watchful eagles. The thought of encountering others, of seeing fear bloom in their eyes as they beheld his enormous size, made his stomach clench. "I go as the ancestors direct," he reminded himself, touching the vision stones that now hung on a leather cord around his neck. "I go not as a warrior, but as a creator." As dawn broke on the second day after his vision, Nantan stood at the mouth of his cave and faced the eastern horizon. The creatures that had been his only companions seemed to sense his imminent departure. A pair of eagles circled overhead, their cries piercing the morning stillness. A young deer and its mother watched from the edge of the spring, ears flicking curiously. Even the canyon wolves had appeared on a distant ridge, a silent audience to his leaving. "Watch over this place," Nantan said to them. "I will return when my task is complete." He shouldered his small pack, gripped his journey staff, and took his first steps away from the home that had sheltered him through his exile. The path was fainter game trail that wound through the narrowest part of the canyon before opening to the wider desert beyond. Nantan followed it with the steady pace of one accustomed to covering long distances on foot. By midday, the familiar rock formations of his canyon had fallen behind the horizon. Before him stretched a landscape both known and unknown, the great desert that separated the various Apache bands from one another. In the distance, blue mountains shimmered in the heat, their peaks dusted with early snow. His vision had shown him a village nestled against red canyon walls, similar to his own dwelling place, yet different. The Apache people were scattered across many such canyons and mesas. Which one held the small medicine woman? The ancestors had not provided that detail. Nantan paused in the shade of a solitary juniper, consulting the sun's position. His instinct pulled him southwest, toward a range of mesas visible as a darker line against the horizon. He would start there and trust the spirits to guide him further. As he resumed his journey, he encountered the first humans he had seen in 7 Yerstwo traders leading heavily laden burros along a well-worn trail. They spotted him from a distance, and Nantan saw the familiar reaction begin to unfold. First, curiosity at the lone traveler. Then, as they registered his enormous size, wariness. They altered their course, giving him a wide berth, hands moving casually but unmistakably toward their weapons. Nantan raised his hand in the traditional peace greeting but did not approach. The traders returned the gesture hastily before hurrying on their way, glancing back repeatedly until they were well beyond his reach. He sighed, the encounter confirming his fears. Yet he pressed on as the afternoon lengthened into evening. That night, camped beneath the stars, Nantan dreamed again of the small woman. This time, she sat alone by a fire while celebration sounds came from somewhere beyond. Her solitude matched his own, a recognition that eased his heart, even in sleep. "I am coming," he whispered to the night sky when he woke. "I do not know why or how, but I am coming." 2 weeks had passed since the dissolution of Kiona's betrothal. 2 weeks of avoiding pitying glances, of pretending not to notice when conversations halted as she approached. 2 weeks of watching Taklishim and Nara openly planning their union, their heads bent together in conversation, their laughter carrying across the village circle. Kiona had thrown herself into her medicine work with renewed dedication. If she could not be valued as a woman, she would ensure that her worth as a healer could never be questioned. She rose earlier, gathered plants more diligently, spent longer hours preparing remedies than ever before. "You need rest," her grandmother had told her the previous evening, noting the shadows beneath Kiona's eyes. Even the most potent medicine loses strength when the one who makes it is depleted. But rest meant stillness, and stillness invited thought. Thought led inevitably to the empty cradle board that now sat in the darkest corner of her wickiup, a gift from the village women, carved in anticipation of the children she would bear, children who would now never exist. This morning, Kiona knelt by the stream that ran near the village, washing roots for a poultice. Her reflection wavered in the flowing water, the same face she had always known, yet somehow changed. Sharper, perhaps, more serious, the face of a woman who had seen one possible future dissolve and was still searching for another. Medicine woman. The voice startled her. Looking up, she saw Taklishim's younger brother, Chetan, standing a respectful distance away. At 16 summers, he was already showing signs of the same height and strength that made his brother so admired among the warriors. "Little Red Bird is sick again," he said, using the nickname of his 5-year-old sister. "The fever has returned." Kiona nodded, quickly gathering her materials. Little Redbird had been ill the previous moon with a persistent fever that had finally broken after Kiona's treatment with willow bark and special root teas. Its return was concerning. She followed Chetan to his family's wickiup, acutely aware that she would likely encounter Taklishim there. Sure enough, he stood outside with his father, both men looking grave. "The sickness has a stronger hold this time," Taklishim said without greeting or acknowledgement of their past. "She cannot keep water down." Kiona moved past him without response, ducking into the wickiup where the child lay on a buffalo robe, her small face flushed with fever, her breathing rapid and shallow. The girl's mother sat beside her, wiping her brow with a damp cloth. "I came as soon as I was called," Kiona said, kneeling beside them. The symptoms were worse indeed, the fever higher, the child's pulse more rapid, her skin hot and dry despite the cool morning. Kiona checked the girl's throat, felt the glands in her neck, listened to her breathing. "I will need to gather special herbs," she said finally. "They grow only on the eastern ridge, where the morning sun first touches the canyon." The mother looked alarmed. "That area is dangerous too near Navajo hunting grounds." "It is the only place these plants grow," Kiona replied. "And they are what Little Red Bird needs now." Outside the wickiup, she found Taklishim and his father waiting for her assessment. "She needs stronger medicine than what I have prepared," Kiona explained. "I must gather it from the eastern ridge." Taklishim frowned. "No one goes there alone. It is too dangerous." "Then send a warrior to accompany me," Kiona suggested, her voice calm despite the tension between them. "But it must be done quickly. The fever is higher than before." Taklishim studied her for a moment, then nodded curtly. "I will find someone to go with you." But instead of Taklishim himself or one of the senior warriors, she was assigned a boy barely past his warrior ceremony, old enough to carry a bow, but young enough to be considered expendable if there was true danger. The message was clear. Little Redbird's life was valuable, but Kiona's safety was not a priority. Nevertheless, she gathered her collection pouches and knife, tying back her hair for the climb ahead. The eastern ridge was steep and exposed, requiring careful navigation of narrow ledges and loose shale. But the healing plant she sought, a rare variety of sage with powerful properties against fever, grew nowhere else in their territory. "I am still of use," she whispered to herself as she prepared to leave. "My hands may be small, but they find medicines others cannot." With the young warrior trailing behind her, Kiona set out toward the eastern ridge, her steps purposeful, her medicine pouch secure at her waist, and her heart carefully guarded against further wounds. 5 days into his journey, Nantan-Gahas reached the place his people called the Canyon of Voices. Even as a child, he had heard stories of this sacred place where the ancestors spoke more clearly than anywhere elsewhere. The wind carried whispers of guidance, and the rocks themselves held memories of those who had walked the earth before. Few Apache ventured here, considering it too holy for casual visitation. Only those on vision quests or medicine men seeking deepest wisdom would normally enter this narrow passage between towering red cliffs. Nantan paused at the entrance, remembering the proper rituals. He gathered sage and juniper from nearby bushes and created a small offering fire. The smoke rose in a straight column, undisturbed by wind, good sign that his presence was accepted. "I come with respect," he said aloud, his deep voice echoing slightly against the stone walls. "I seek guidance to fulfill the vision given to me." Taking a pinch of cornmeal from his pouch, he scattered it at the threshold of the canyon, then waited for the subtle signs that would indicate permission to enter. A hawk circled overhead, crying once before flying directly into the canyon. Nantan nodded and followed, his journey staff tapping rhythmically against the stone path. The canyon narrowed as he progressed, its walls rising higher on either side, until only a strip of blue sky remained visible above. The quality of sound changed. two each footstep creating echoes that seemed to continue longer than natural acoustics would allow. The air felt thicker, charged with an energy that made the hairs on his arms rise. Halfway through the passage, Nantan came upon the first petroglyph sentient carvings etched into the sandstone by ancestors whose names were long forgotten. He paused to study them, his fingers hovering near but not touching the sacred images. Spirals, handprints, animal forms, and human figures danced across the rock faces stories whose meanings had blurred with time. But one particular grouping caught his eye and stopped his breath. There, at eye level even for his tall frame, was a clearly carved scene, a very small human figure standing beside a much larger one. Between them, a shape that could only be a stone monument rising toward the sun. "It cannot be coincidence," Nantan whispered, staring at the carving that so perfectly mirrored his vision. As if in response to his words, a sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it a scent of approaching rain. Nantan looked up to see storm clouds gathering with unnatural speed above the narrow opening of sky. Within moments, the first heavy drops began to fall, forcing him to seek shelter in a shallow cave carved into the canyon wall. From this protected vantage point, Nantan watched as the storm intensified, rain pouring down in sheets that transformed the dry canyon floor into a rushing stream. Thunder echoed between the stone walls, amplified into bone-shaking rumbles. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the entire canyon in stark white light. During one such flash, Nantan saw it a massive sandstone formation about 50 paces further along the canyon. In that split second of illumination, the stone had appeared to have the rough shape of a woman, as though nature had begun a sculpture that awaited completion by human hands. He waited out the storm, which ended as abruptly as it had begun. When the last raindrops had fallen and the newly formed stream had reduced to a gentle trickle, Nantan emerged from his shelter and walked directly to the formation he had glimpsed. Standing before it in the clear light of late afternoon, he could see how perfectly suited it was for his purpose. The sandstone was of the finest quality, soft enough to carve, yet durable enough to withstand the elements. Its natural shape already suggested a human form, with an outcropping that resembled a head and a narrower section that could become a waist. Nantan circled the formation slowly, studying it from all angles. In his mind's eye, he could already see the completed monumenta woman, small in physical stature, yet powerful in presence, her face serene with wisdom, her hands extended in healing. He knelt beside the stone and placed his palm against its surface, still warm despite the recent rain. A vibration seemed to pass from the rock into his hand, up his arm, and straight to his hard connection that transcended physical touch. "Here," he said simply, "this is where I will create what the ancestors have shown me." From his pack, Nantan removed the few carving tools he had brought, a stone hammer, chisels of various sizes, and a scraping blade. Simple implements for an enormous task. But as he tested the sandstone with the smallest chisel, he found it yielded more easily than expected, as though eager to reveal the form hidden within. Before making the first true strike, Nantan closed his eyes and focused his thoughts on the small woman from his vision. "I do not know your name," he murmured, "but I carry your image in my heart. Guide my hands to honor you properly." 3 days after Kiona's successful journey to the Eastern Ridge trip that had yielded the rare sage, needed to break Little Red Bird's fever, the village awoke to an unfamiliar sensation. A subtle vibration pulsed through the ground, not violent like an earthquake, but persistent like a distant heartbeat. The elders emerged from their wickiups, faces creased with concern as they placed weathered palms against the earth. "It comes from the direction of the Canyon of Voices," said Whitehawk, the oldest of the medicine men, his milky eyes turned toward the western horizon. By midday, the vibrations had grown stronger. Clay pots rattled on packed earth floors. Water in collecting basins rippled in concentric circles. Even the horses in their corral stomped nervously, sensing the unnatural rhythm beneath their hooves. The chief called a council, and the talking feather was passed from hand to hand as each elder offered an interpretation of the strange phenomenon. "It is a warning," said one. "The Navajo prepare for war, and the earth itself tells us to be ready." "No," countered another. "It is the ancestors displeased with recent decisions." His eyes flicked briefly toward Taklishim, who sat stone-faced in the warriors' section of the circle. "Perhaps it is merely the mountain spirits playing their games," suggested a third. "They sometimes roll great boulders down hidden slopes for their amusement." Kiona sat at the edge of the circle, in the place reserved for the medicine, woman respected enough to be present, but not expected to speak unless directly addressed. Yet as she listened to the theories, she found herself focusing on the particular quality of the vibrations. Unlike the others, who felt only the disturbance, Kiona perceived a pattern. Thump, pause, thump, thump, longer pause, thump. There was intention in the rhythm, a deliberateness that reminded her of footsteps, she whispered to herself, or heartbeats. The elder sitting nearest heard her murmur. "The medicine woman wishes to speak," he announced, surprising Kiona. The talking feather was passed to her, an unusual honor for one so young, especially a woman. Holding the feather carefully in her small hands, Kiona chose her words with caution. "I do not claim great wisdom," she began, "but these vibrations carry a pattern that reminds me of footsteps, or perhaps the heartbeat of something large." Several warriors snorted dismissively, Taklishim among them. What creature would be large enough for its steps to shake the earth from such distance? He asked, not bothering to wait for the talking feather. "The small one thinks in small ways." The chief frowned at the breach of protocol, but did not reprimand his favored warrior. Instead, he reclaimed the feather and addressed the council. "Whatever the cause, we must investigate. I will send scouts to the Canyon of Voices to discover the source of these disturbances." "I will lead them," Taklishim offered immediately, clearly eager for action and perhaps to prove Kiona's theory wrong. The chief nodded. "Take 4 warriors. Approach with caution. The Canyon of Voices is sacred ground, and what walks there may not be of this world." As the council dispersed, Kiona approached the chief with uncharacteristic boldness. "Chief Mikado," she said, bowing her head respectfully, "I request permission to accompany the scouting party." Surprise flickered across the elder's face. "The canyon is many hours' journey on a difficult path," he said, "and there may be danger." "I understand," Kiona replied steadily, "but I am gathering spring medicines, and the canyon holds plants that grow nowhere else. With little Redbird recovered and no other serious illnesses in the village, this is the best time for me to replenish our most sacred remedies." The chief studied her for a long moment. Kiona met his gaze without wavering, though her heart beat rapidly beneath her calm exterior. She did not fully understand why she felt so strongly about accompanying the scouts, but the pulling sensation in her chest when she thought of the canyon was undeniable. Finally, he nodded. "You may go, but you will obey Taklishim's leadership without question. If he determines there is danger, you will retreat immediately." Kiona bowed again. "Thank you, Chief Mikado." When she told her parents of her plan, her mother's face creased with worry. "The Canyon of Voices is not a place to be entered lightly," she cautioned, "and to go with Taklishim after everything—" "I go as medicine woman, not as his former betrothed," Kiona said firmly. "And something calls me there. I cannot explain it better than that." That evening, as she prepared her traveling pack with collection pouches, her knife, and dried provisions, Kiona found herself humming in rhythm with the persistent vibrations that continued to pulse through the ground. The sensation no longer felt threatening to her, but rather like a summons, as though something or someone was calling specifically to her from the sacred canyon. "I am coming," she whispered to the trembling earth. "I hear you." With each strike of his stone hammer against the chisel, Nantan-Gahas sent vibrations through the sandstone and into the canyon floor. He worked methodically, circling the massive formation, removing large chunks at first to reveal the basic shape hidden within the rock. His enormous hands, once feared for their destructive potential, now moved with surprising delicacy as they guided the tools. Dawn to dusk he worked, pausing only to drink from the small spring that bubbled up near the canyon wall or to eat a handful of dried meat from his provisions. At night, he slept beside his creation, often waking to place a hand against the stone, as though to reassure it or himself that this communion was real. By the third day, his hands were raw and bleeding. The sandstone, though relatively soft for carving, still abraded his skin with each strike and cut. Red streaks now marked his tools where his blood had transferred from fingers to handles. Nantan did not mind. In the old stories, the greatest creations always required sacrifice from their makers. "The offering is freely given," he murmured on the morning of the fourth day, examining his cracked palms before beginning again. He wrapped strips of buckskin around the worst cuts and continued his work. Gradually, a form began to emerge from the stone, the rough outline of a woman small in stature compared to the massive block from which she was being born, yet positioned in a way that conveyed dignity and strength. Nantan had begun with her face, guided by the vision that had shown him features he somehow knew as intimately as his own reflection. As he worked, he spoke to the stone as though it could hear him. It was the most he had talked in 7 years. "Your eyes will show wisdom," he told the rough-hewn face taking shape beneath his chisel, "the kind that sees beyond surfaces to the truth beneath. Your hands will be small but capable, the hands of a healer who knows which plants bring life and which bring sleep." Sometimes he sang as he worked old songs his mother had taught him, songs of creation and balance, of the eternal dance between masculine and feminine energies that kept the world in harmony. The canyon walls caught his deep voice and amplified it, sending it outward in all directions. On the 5th day, as Nantan carefully shaped the delicate curve of the statue's cheek, he became aware that he was not alone. A golden eagle had perched on a ledge directly across from his worksite and watched him with unblinking intensity. Later, a small herd of deer approached the canyon stream to drink, showing no fear of his presence. By sundown, a pair of wolves sat at a respectful distance, their amber eyes reflecting the last light as they observed his continuing labor. "You come to witness?" Nantan asked them, not pausing in his work. "Good. She deserves an audience." That night, for the first time since beginning his task, clouds gathered above the narrow strip of sky visible from the canyon floor. The air grew heavy with the scent of rain, though no drops fell. Wind sighed through the passages, creating whispers that almost formed words. Nantan listened as he rested his tired body against the base of the half-formed statue. "I do not yet know why this connection exists," he said softly to the woman taking shape in stone. "Why my dreams led me to you, or why the ancestors wish me to create this monument. But I feel you growing more real with each passing day." He laid his palm against the carved face, and for a moment so briefly he might have imagined the felt warmth beneath his touch, as though the stone itself lived and breathed. When dawn broke on the 6th day, Nantan noticed something unusual about the weather. Clouds still hung above the canyon, but they remained stationary despite the wind that continued to move through the lower air. It was as though the sky itself was focused on his work, unwilling to look away even for a moment. The animals, too, had returned in greater numbers. Birds of many kinds perched along the canyon walls. Small creatures, rabbits, ground squirrels, even a fox gathered at the edges of the work area. None showed fear, and none made any sound. They simply watched. Nantan understood that something beyond his own intention was now involved in his creation. The spirits of the canyon, perhaps the ancestors themselves, had taken interest in his work. The thought both humbled and energized him. Despite his bleeding hands and aching muscles, he attacked the stone with renewed vigor. By sunset, the form had progressed significantly, the face now clearly feminine with high cheekbones and a gentle brow, the torso emerging from the rock with arms beginning to take shape at the sides. Tomorrow, he promised both himself and his audience of creatures, tomorrow her hands will begin to form. The most important part of a healer. The scouting party left at dawn, 5 warriors and 1 medicine woman moving silently through the desert landscape. Taklishim led the way, his tall figure cutting a commanding silhouette against the rising sun. The other warriors, all young men eager to prove themselves, followed closely behind. Kiona walked at the rear, her small steps somehow keeping pace with the longer strides of the men ahead. They traveled in silence for most of the morning, the only sounds their moccasins against stone and the occasional call of a hunting bird overhead. The vibrations they had felt in the village grew stronger as they approached the sacred canyon, evolving from subtle tremors to distinct pulses that seemed to match the rhythm of their own heartbeats. By midday, they reached the narrow passage that marked the entrance to the Canyon of Voices. Here, Taklishim raised his hand, signaling the group to halt. "We approach sacred ground," he said, his voice low. "From here we move with utmost care, no unnecessary sounds." The warriors nodded, checking their weapons with practiced hands. Each carried a bow, arrows, and a hunting knife. Kiona carried only her medicine pouch and a small knife used for cutting plant stools of healing, not harm. They performed the traditional rituals of respect before entering, offering cornmeal, speaking words of reverence to the ancestors. Then, moving like shadows, they slipped into the canyon's cool embrace. The vibrations were much stronger now, pulsing through the stone beneath their feet. Along with them came a new sound, a rhythmic tapping that echoed off the canyon walls, magnified by the natural acoustics of the space. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It was a deliberate pattern, clearly made by intelligent hands rather than natural forces. Taklishim signaled for the party to spread out, using hand gestures to direct each warrior to a different approach route. To Kiona, he motioned to stay back, pointing firmly at a recessed area where she would be hidden from whatever lay ahead. She nodded obediently, but had no intention of remaining behind. As soon as the warriors disappeared around a bend in the canyon, she followed, keeping to the shadows cast by the towering walls. The sound grew louder as she advanced, now accompanied by something else, deep voice, singing in the old language, words of creation and balance that she recognized from the most ancient ceremonies. The voice was male, powerful yet gentle, filling the canyon with resonant tones that seemed to make the very stones vibrate in harmony. Creeping forward, Kiona glimpsed the warriors ahead, all frozen in place, staring at something beyond her view. Their postures radiated tension, hands on weapons, bodies poised either to attack or retreat. She eased closer, finding a vantage point behind a large boulder that allowed her to see what had captured their attention. Her breath caught in her throat. In a widened area of the canyon stood the largest man she had ever seen, a giant, whose head would brush the roof of the tallest wickiup. His massive arms, muscles rippling beneath copper skin, wielded tools that would require 2 hands for an ordinary man to lift. He was shirtless, his broad back gleaming with sweat as he worked at something before him. And that something was taking the shape of a woman, emerging from living stone. The statue was already recognizable as female, though still rough in many areas. The face had been carved with particular care, delicate features, high cheekbones, a gentle expression that somehow conveyed both strength and compassion. As the giant shifted position to work on another section, Kiona glimpsed the statue's full form. Though still partially encased in raw stone, its proportions were unmistakably a woman of small stature, her head reaching perhaps to the chest of an average man. A woman exactly Kiona's size. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. She must have made some small sound, for Taklishim's head whipped around, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her behind the boulder. His expression darkened with anger at her disobedience. But before he could react further, the giant paused in his work, his head tilting as though listening. In one fluid motion, he turned to face the hidden observers, his tool held ready not as a weapon, but as if to protect his creation. "I know you are there," his deep voice rumbled, filling the canyon. "I have felt your approach since sunrise." Taklishim signaled frantically for his warriors to take defensive positions. One of the younger men, nervous at the giant's sudden awareness, fumbled an arrow from his quiver. It clattered against stone, the sound amplified by the canyon's acoustics. The giant's eyes, dark and surprisingly gentle, scanned the shadows until they found the source of the noise. "I mean no harm," he said, slowly lowering his tool. "I come in peace to fulfill a vision." Taklishim stepped forward then, bow half raised, his face a mask of wary hostility. "Who are you to enter the sacred canyon without permission? What are you creating here that shakes the very ground of our village?" From her hiding place, Kiona could only watch as the 2 men faced each other, one massive, beyond normal human proportions, the other tall and proud in his warrior's strength. Between them stood the half-formed statue, its unseeing eyes somehow reminiscent of her own. "I am Nantan-Gahas," the giant said simply, "and I carve what the ancestors have shown me must exist." Word traveled swiftly back to the village. One young warrior had been dispatched immediately, carrying a warning arrow marked with symbols of unprecedented discovery. By sunset, Chief Mikado had arrived at the canyon with a larger party that included White Hawk, the elder medicine man, and several senior warriors. They brought with them the chief's speaking staff, its feathers and carvings denoting the full authority of tribal leadership. Nantan-Gahas stood calmly beside his creation, which he had covered with a woven mat out of respect for the arrival of the chief. Despite his enormous size, his posture conveyed peace rather than threat. He had set aside his tools and waited with patient dignity as the village leaders approached. "I am Chief Mikado of the Red Canyon Apache," the elder announced, holding his speaking staff vertically. "You stand on sacred ground without the permission of our people." "I come by direction of the ancestors," Nantan replied, his deep voice resonant in the canyon space. "I have followed proper rituals and made appropriate offerings." White Hawk stepped forward. His ancient eyes narrowed as he studied the giant. "Your face, I know it from the stories." The old medicine man turned to the chief. "This is the one called Nantan-Gahas, the giant who killed." A murmur ran through the gathered Apache. Even Kiona, who had remained with the original scouting party, felt a shiver of recognition. Every child of the tribe knew the story of the giant warrior who had accidentally slain a man with his unnatural strength and then disappeared into the wilderness. "7 years ago you left your people," Chief Mikado said, his voice hardening. "Why do you return now, and to our territory rather than your own?" "I was guided here," Nantan answered simply, "through dreams and visions that grew stronger until I could no longer ignore them." "And this creation?" The chief gestured toward the covered statue. "What purpose does it serve?" Nantan was silent for a moment, his eyes moving across the gathered faces until they found Kiona's. Something passed between thema recognition that transcended understanding. Then he turned back to the chief. "May I show you?" After a brief consultation with his advisors, Mikado nodded. Nantan carefully removed the covering mat, revealing the statue. Though still unfinished, its form was now clearly visible, a woman of small stature yet dignified bearing, her hands beginning to take the shape of a healer's gentle touch, her face serene with an expression of wisdom beyond years. A collective gasp rose from the gathered Apache. It was impossible to miss the resemblance. "Kiona," someone whispered, and suddenly all eyes turned to the small medicine woman standing at the edge of the gathering. Kiona felt their stares but could not look away from the statue. It was like seeing herself transformed into something timeless and powerful, not just a small woman, but a symbol of something greater. "How do you know her likeness?" demanded Taklishim, stepping aggressively toward Nantan. "You have never seen her before." "I have seen her in visions every night for many moons," Nantan replied calmly. "The ancestors showed her to me, along with this canyon and the stone that waited to become her image." White Hawk had moved closer to the statue, his weathered hand hovering near but not touching its surface. "There is power here," he murmured, "old power." The ancient medicine man turned suddenly, his milky eyes somehow finding Kiona unerringly. "Come forward, daughter." Heart-pounding, Kiona approached. The crowd parted to let her pass, their expressions ranging from awe to confusion to suspicion. As she drew near the statue, a strange sensation washed over her: warmth, recognition, a sense of coming home. She stopped beside White Hawk, feeling impossibly small between the ancient medicine man and the towering figure of Nantan-Gahas. "Look at them," White Hawk said to the chief, his voice gaining strength. "The smallest and the largest among us. Do you not remember the prophecy?" Chief Mikado frowned. "What prophecy?" "From the time of our grandfathers' grandfathers," White Hawk replied. "When extremes meet in balance, when the smallest joins with the largest, a new strength will come to the people." The old man's voice took on the cadence of formal recitation. "The one who reaches high will join with the one who sees what is hidden low. Together they will create medicine more powerful than either could alone." Shock rippled through the gathering. White Hawk rarely invoked the oldest prophecies, considering most of them too sacred for casual mention. "This cannot be," Taklishim protested, his face darkening with anger. "She was promised to me first. I chose to release her because of her weakness." "And in doing so, you fulfilled the first part of the prophecy," White Hawk countered. The small one must be rejected before finding true purpose. Kiona stood frozen, trying to absorb the implications of the medicine man's words. She looked up at Nantan-Gahas, meeting his dark eyes directly for the first time. Though they had never spoken, she felt a connection that defied explanation, as though some part of her had always known him. "I do not understand all of this," she said softly, "but I know that when I first saw your work it felt like seeing my own soul given form." Nantan nodded, a smile warming his solemn features. "And when I first dreamed of you, it was like finding the missing half of a sacred song." The village established a temporary camp near the canyon entrance. Chief Mikado had declared that they would remain until the tribal council could properly interpret the meaning of Nantan's statue and its connection to the ancient prophecy. White Hawk spent hours each day in meditation at the sacred stones, seeking guidance from the ancestors. For Nantan-Gahas, little changed. He continued his work on the statue, though now under the watchful eyes of the tribe. Some kept their distance, still fearful of his enormous size and the stories of his deadly strength. Others, particularly the children, crept closer each day, fascinated by his gentle movements and the emerging beauty of his creation. Kiona found herself drawn repeatedly to the carving site. At first, she maintained a respectful distance, observing quietly as Nantan shaped the stone with his massive yet surprisingly delicate hands. Gradually, she began to bring him small offerings, fresh water from the spring, healing salve for his cracked palms, medicinal tea to ease his tired muscles. They spoke little during these encounters, yet a wordless understanding grew between them. She would point to a particular curve of the statue's face, and he would nod, making a subtle adjustment that somehow captured her essence more perfectly. He would pause in his work, looking to her for confirmation, and she would smile in silent approval. "The stone knows you," he told her on the third day, one of the few direct statements he had made. "It reveals you to me as I carve." The growing connection between the small medicine woman and the gentle giant did not go unnoticed. Most of the elders watched with cautious interest, seeing the potential fulfillment of prophecy. The mothers with sick children observed how Kiona's medicine seemed more potent after she had spent time near the statue. Even some of the warriors began to acknowledge that there was power in this unexpected pairing. But Taklishim seethed with resentment. Though he had chosen to release Kiona from their betrothal, the idea that she might now be destined for someone else, especially someone who so dramatically overshadowed him in physical presence, wounded his pride deeply. On the fourth day after the villagers' arrival, he approached the chief's fire as the council gathered for evening discussions. "I challenge the giant," he announced without preamble, his voice carrying across the camp. Conversations ceased. All eyes turned to Taklishim, standing tall and proud, with his challenge spear held vertically beside him. The spear had been ritually painted with the symbols of formal combat: red for blood, black for death, white for honor. Chief Mikado regarded him with a measured gaze. "On what grounds do you issue this challenge, Taklishim?" "On the grounds of protection," he replied firmly. "This outsider claims connection to our medicine woman based on dreams and ancient words that may be misinterpreted. Before such a claim is accepted, he must prove his worthiness through traditional trials." The chief looked to White Hawk for guidance. The old medicine man nodded slowly. "The warrior speaks with some wisdom," he admitted. "New paths should not be embraced without testing their strength." Nantan-Gahas had paused in his carving upon hearing the challenge. Now he approached the council fire, his massive form dwarfing even the tallest warriors. He stopped at a respectful distance, awaiting permission to speak. "You have heard the challenge," Chief Mikado said to him. "What is your response?" Nantan's expression remained calm, though concern flickered in his dark eyes. "I did not come seeking conflict," he said. "My purpose was only to create what the ancestors showed me." "Yet you claim a connection to one of our own," Taklishim countered. "Such a claim cannot go untested." Kiona stepped forward then, her small figure a stark contrast to the two tall men. "If this concerns me, should I not have a voice in it?" Taklishim frowned. "This is a matter for warriors, not women." "Yet it is about a prophecy that involves both warrior and healer," she replied, a new steadiness in her voice. "If there must be a challenge, let it be one that tests both strength and spirit." The council members exchanged glances, surprised by her boldness. Whitehawk's weathered face creased in a smile of approval. "The small one speaks with the ancestor's voice," he said. "A traditional challenge would test only physical power, but this situation calls for a more balanced approach." After a long moment of consideration, Chief Mikado nodded. "This is wisdom. Instead of combat, which tests only one kind of strength, the challenge will have three parts." He turned to Taklishim. "Do you accept this modification?" The warrior hesitated, clearly having expected a straightforward contest of strength in which, despite Nantan's size, Taklishim's skill and training might give him advantage. But to refuse now would show weakness before the tribe. "I accept," he said finally, "if the giant does as well." All eyes turned to Nantan-Gahas. He looked at Kiona, a question in his gaze. She gave a slight nod, her expression conveying confidence in his abilities beyond mere physical power. "I accept," Nantan said, his deep voice resolute. Chief Mikado rose to his feet, taking his speaking staff in hand. "It is decided. 3 trials will determine the truth of the prophecy and the rightful place of both Nantan-Gahas and Kiona among our people. The trials will test hunting prowess, endurance, and spiritual connection." He struck his staff against the ground 3 times, sealing the decision. "The challenges begin at dawn." Taklishim drove his painted spear into the earth before Nantan, the formal symbol of challenge given and accepted. "Prepare yourself, giant," he said, his voice low enough that only Nantan could hear. "I will not lose what should have been mine." Dawn broke with a sky streaked in shades of amber and gold, as though the heavens themselves had awakened to witness the trials. The entire tribe gathered at the edge of the forest that bordered the canyon lands, the traditional hunting grounds where the first challenge would take place. Chief Mikado stood between Taklishim and Nantan-Gahas, explaining the rules of the hunt. "You will each seek a worthy prey animal, not for meat or hide, but as a demonstration of skill and connection to the natural world. You must return by midday with evidence of your hunt." Taklishim wore his finest hunting attire, a lightweight buckskin shirt decorated with porcupine quills, leggings that allowed silent movement through underbrush, and moccasins soled with the thickest hide for protection against sharp stones. At his side hung his prized hunting knife, and in his hands he held his strongest bow, already strung and ready. By contrast, Nantan-Gahas carried only a simple staff. He wore the same buckskin breeches he had worn for his carving work, his massive chest bare save for a medicine pouch that hung from a cord around his neck. "You bring no bow?" Taklishim asked, not bothering to hide his scorn. "No knife?" "I hunt differently," Nantan replied simply. Kiona watched from her place among the women, her heart beating rapidly beneath her calm exterior. During her brief interactions with Nantan, she had sensed his deep connection to the natural world. Yet Taklishim was known as the tribe's most skilled hunter, a man who could track a rabbit across bare stone. "Begin," commanded the chief, and the 2 men set off in different directions. Taklishim moving with practiced stealth into the densest part of the forest, Nantan walking openly toward a sunlit meadow. For the next several hours, the tribe waited. Some engaged in quiet conversation, others prepared the midday meal, but all kept glancing toward the forest's edge, anticipating the hunter's return. Kiona found herself standing near Whitehawk, the ancient medicine man who had recognized the prophecy connecting her to Nantan. "You are troubled," the old man observed. "I fear for him," she admitted. "Taklishim is a skilled hunter, and Nantan brings no weapons." Whitehawk's weathered face creased in a smile. "There are many ways to hunt, little one. Some require weapons, others require understanding." Just as the sun reached its zenith, movement at the forest edge caught everyone's attention. Taklishim emerged, his face set in triumphant lines. Over his shoulder he carried a freshly killed bucka, fine specimen, with an impressive rack of antlers. The warriors of the tribe called out in approval at the sight. Taklishim laid his prize before the chief. "A worthy animal," he declared, "taken with a single arrow through the heart. Clean, quick, respectful." Chief Mikado nodded in acknowledgement. A hunter's honor is shown in how he takes life as well as in what he chooses to take. He looked toward the forest. But we must wait for Nantan-Gahas before judgment can be made. They did not have to wait long. Within moments, a murmur swept through the gathered tribe as Nantan appeared at the tree line. He was not alone. Walking beside him, matching its pace to his steady stride, came the largest buck many of them had ever seen. Its coat gleamed silver-brown in the midday sun, its antlers spreading wide enough to cast a shadow like branches. Most remarkably, its antlers bore unusual markings, natural colorations that resembled ancient symbols for strength and wisdom. The deer showed no fear as it accompanied Nantan to the center of the gathering. It stood calmly as the giant stopped before the chief, the two beings side by side as though equals in some unspoken pact. "I bring no death," Nantan said quietly. "The brother deer has agreed to come and be witnessed. He offers a gift freely given." As if on cue, the magnificent buck lowered its head and with a twist of its powerful neck broke off one of its antlers. The sound like a small branch snapping made several people gasp. The buck placed the antler on the ground before Chief Mikado, then raised its head again, seemingly untroubled by the loss. White Hawk stepped forward, his ancient hand trembling as he reached toward the offered antler. "In all my years," he whispered, "I have never seen such a thing. The dear brother has made a sacrifice without being sacrificed." Taklishim's face had darkened with each passing moment. "This proves nothing," he protested. "Any hunter can kill. It takes true skill to—" His words died as the buck turned to face him directly. The animal's eyes, deep and knowing, held the warrior's gaze until Taklishim looked away first. "The deer has judged," White Hawk announced. "It has chosen to give to one and withhold from the other." Chief Mikado nodded slowly, picking up the shed antler with reverent hands. "The first trial is complete," he declared. "Nantan-Gahas has demonstrated not the power to take life, but the far rarer ability to receive willing sacrifice. The ancestors honor such gifts above all others." As the chief spoke, the great buck turned and walked calmly back to the forest edge. There it paused, looking back once at Nantan, before disappearing among the trees. Kiona released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her eyes met Nantan's across the gathering, and the connection between them seemed to strengthen, like a cord pulling taut with shared understanding. As evening approached, the second trial began. At the highest point overlooking the canyon, 2 ceremonial fires were prepared, one for each contestant. Between them, a larger sacred fire burned, tended by White Hawk himself. This central flame would burn throughout the night, its smoke carrying prayers to the ancestors. "The test of endurance is simple yet demanding," Chief Mikado explained to the gathered tribe. "Each man must maintain his fire through the night, no matter what challenges arise. The fire represents life itself, the spirit that must be protected against all hardship. At dawn, we will see whose flame still burns." Dark clouds had begun gathering on the western horizon, unusual for the season. Several of the elders exchanged concerned glances, reading the weather signs with practiced eyes. "A storm comes," one murmured. "A powerful one." Taklishim studied the approaching clouds, then immediately set to work with tactical precision. He gathered an abundance of firewood, creating a substantial stockpile. He constructed a stone windbreak around his fire pit, angling it against the prevailing wind direction. He even fashioned a simple shelter of branches and hides that would allow him to protect the flames while staying dry himself. Nantan approached his task differently. He selected his wood with great care, choosing pieces that would burn slowly and steadily. Rather than building physical protections, he circled his fire 7 times, singing a low, rhythmic song in the ancient language, prayer for harmony with the elements. His preparations complete, he simply sat cross-legged beside his modest flame, his massive form creating a natural windbreak. As darkness fell, the rest of the tribe retreated to the safety of the camp below, leaving only Chief Mikado, White Hawk, and a few designated witnesses to observe from a sheltered overhang. Kiona remained among them, having been granted special permission as the one most connected to the prophecy's outcome. The storm arrived with startling swiftness. Wind howled through the canyon, bending trees and sending loose stones skittering across bare ground. Lightning split the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. Then came the rain knot, the gentle showers of spring, but heavy, driving sheets that struck with almost physical force. From her position beneath the overhang, Kiona could see both men battling the elements. Taklishim worked frantically, adjusting his windbreak, huddling over his fire to shield it with his body, adding carefully rationed wood to maintain the flames. His technical skill was impressive, his determination unwavering. Nantan, by contrast, remained eerily still. He continued his slow, rhythmic singing, occasionally raising his hands as though in conversation with the storm itself. His fire, though smaller than Taklishim's, burned with a steady intensity that seemed to defy the downpour. Most remarkable to Kiona was what happened to the rain as it approached Nantan's circle. Though she could scarcely believe her eyes, it appeared that the heaviest drops somehow curved around his fire, as though an invisible dome protected the sacred flame. "He is not fighting the elements," White Hawk whispered beside her. "He is asking their cooperation." As midnight passed and the storm intensified, Taklishim's strategic reserves began to dwindle. His carefully constructed windbreak had partially collapsed under the onslaught, forcing him to rebuild while simultaneously shielding his increasingly vulnerable flame. His face, illuminated by sporadic lightning flashes, showed exhaustion and growing desperation. Yet it was not only his own fire that concerned him. Repeatedly, his gaze darted to Nantan, disbelief evident even at a distance as he saw the giant's flame continuing to burn steadily despite the storm's fury. Near dawn, the most violent cloudburst yet descended upon the mountain. Taklishim fought valiantly, using his own body as a shield, sacrificing his comfort and safety for the survival of his fire. But nature proved stronger. With a final, defiant sputter, his flame succumbed to the deluge. The warrior's cry of frustration carried even over the storm's roar. He stood drenched and defeated, staring at the smoking remnants of his fire as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. When the witnesses emerged from their shelter to inspect the outcome, they found Taklishim standing rigidly beside his extinguished fire pit. Nantan remained seated in his original position, his fire still burning with a clear, steady flame. More surprisingly, the ground around him was relatively dry, as though the worst of the storm had somehow passed him by. But what truly astonished the observers was the realization that Nantan's songs throughout the night had not been solely for his own fire's protection. The central sacred fire, the one representing the tribe's collective spirit, burned just as strongly as his personal flame, despite being fully exposed to the elements. "He sang for both fires," Whitehawk said, wonder in his ancient voice, "for his own and for the people's." Chief Mikado stepped forward, his expression solemn as he officially declared the outcome. "The second trial is complete. Nantan-Gahas has demonstrated not merely the endurance to preserve his own flame, but the generosity to protect the sacred fire of all. This shows the true heart of a guardian." Kiona's eyes met Nantan's across the distance. In that moment of connection, she felt something stir within her own spirit aflame, kindling that had nothing to do with physical fire, and everything to do with recognition of a soul that somehow complemented her own. After a day of rest following the storm, the tribe gathered at the base of Nantan's nearly completed statue for the final challenge. The monument now stood fully formed, its features refined and detailed, lacking only the final smoothing and sacred markings that would complete it. Even in its unfinished state, the statue emanated a presence that many found unsettling and others found comforting, though it existed in the boundary space between stone and spirit. "The third and most important trial will test spiritual connection," Chief Mikado announced. "Each challenger must demonstrate his ability to communicate with the ancestors and receive their guidance. This is the foundation of our people's strength, not just physical power or endurance, but the wisdom to hear those who walked before us." The chief turned to the ancient medicine man. "Whitehawk will judge this trial, for his connection to the spirit world is strongest among us." The old man stepped forward, his frail body somehow projecting immense dignity. "The statue will be the focus," he declared. It stands as a bridge between worlds created by human hands, but guided by ancestral vision. Each challenger will approach it in turn and attempt to awaken its medicine power. Taklishim would go first. He had spent the morning in preparation, painting his body with traditional symbols, fasting to purify his spirit, meditating to clear his mind. Now he approached the statue with a ceremonial offering: bundle tobacco, cornmeal, eagle feathers, and sacred herbs bound in buckskin and tied with sinew. The tribe watched in respectful silence as he performed the ritual with perfect precision. His movements were graceful, his chanted prayers word, perfect, his offering placement exactly as tradition dictated. He circled the statue 4 times, calling to the directions and the ancestors in each. He burned sage and sweet grass, wafting the smoke toward the stone figure with a fan of eagle feathers. Every element of the ceremony was flawless, a technical masterpiece of spiritual protocol that demonstrated Taklishim's thorough knowledge of traditional ways. When he had completed the ritual, he stepped back and waited, his face composed in lines of confident expectation. Nothing happened. The statue remained just stone, impressive and beautiful, but showing no sign of spiritual awakening. After a long silence, Whitehawk nodded to indicate that Taklishim's attempt was complete. Now it was Nantan's turn. The giant approached slowly, carrying nothing, wearing only simple buckskin breeches. He had made no visible preparations, applied no paint to his body, created no offering bundle. This apparent lack of respect for tradition caused murmurs among some of the tribal elders. Nantan stopped before the statue and simply stood there, his eyes closed, his breathing deep and regular. After several long moments, he opened his eyes and turned toward the gathered tribe. "The stone is not meant for me alone," he said, his deep voice carrying easily to every ear. "It was created through me, but not for me." With that, he extended his hand toward Kiona, inviting her forward. A ripple of surprise moved through the onlookers. This was unprecedented, involving another in what was supposed to be an individual trial. Taklishim started to object, but Whitehawk raised a hand for silence, his ancient eyes suddenly alert with interest. Heart-pounding, Kiona stepped forward. She felt the weight of the tribe's attention as she moved to stand beside Nantan, her small frame emphasized by his towering height. Together, they faced the statue, the giant, and the small woman, standing before the stone image that somehow incorporated elements of them both. Nantan knelt to bring himself closer to Kiona's level. Without words, he took her right hand in his left, then placed their joined hands against the heart of the statue. The response was immediate and undeniable. A warm glow began to emanate from within the stone, visible even in the daylight, pulsing like a heartbeat where their hands touched. The glow spread, flowing through the statue's core until the entire figure radiated soft, golden light. A collective gasp rose from the tribe, but this was only the beginning. From the statue, a beam of light suddenly shot upward, illuminating a section of the canyon wall that had always been in shadow. There, revealed by the light, were ancient paintings that no one had seen before, images older than memory, preserved in a hollow, protected from weather and time. The paintings told a clear story, a small figure and a large one, standing together with hands joined. Between them, a stone form that bridged worlds. Around them, a tribe prospering, children growing strong, healing flowing from the balanced union of smallest and largest. The prophecy. Whitehawk breathed, his voice filled with wonder. Not just spoken but painted by the ancient ones, hidden until this moment, waiting for the right time to be revealed. Even Taklishim stood transfixed, his anger momentarily forgotten as he witnessed something beyond his understanding. The statue continued to glow, its light reflecting in the wide eyes of the gathered Apache, creating an atmosphere of reverence that transcended personal ambition. Chief Mikado stepped forward, his face solemn with the weight of revelation. "The ancestors have spoken more clearly than any living memory records," he declared. "The third trial is complete, and with it, all doubt is removed. What was foretold has come to pass in our time." He turned to face the tribe. "The balance of smallest and largest brings new medicine to our people. This is not a matter for challenge or contest, it is the will of those who see beyond our limited vision." With the spring moon's fullness came the joining ceremony. not the one originally planned months before, but a new kind of union, foretold in ancient paintings and affirmed by signs that even the most skeptical could not deny. The statue now stood complete at the entrance to the Canyon of Voices, a permanent bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. Its surface had been polished to a subtle sheen, sacred symbols etched into its base, offerings of tobacco and cornmeal refreshed daily by tribal members seeking healing or guidance. Most remarkable was the soft glow that emanated from within the stone at sunrise and sunset, a phenomenon that medicine people from neighboring bands had traveled far to witness. Kiona had woven a new joining blanket, unlike any the tribe had seen before. Instead of the traditional size meant to wrap around a couple of normal proportions, she had created one large enough to encompass both her small frame and Nantan's enormous one. Into its patterns she had woven symbols of balance and complementary strengths, the eagle that soars high and the mole that burrows deep, the mighty oak and the resilient grass, the roaring river and the quiet spring. Different forms of power, she explained to the younger girls who watched her work. Neither greater than the other, both necessary for the whole. Taklishim had departed 2 weeks after the final trial, taking his wounded pride to join a cousin's band further north. His new betrothed, Nara, had chosen to remain, having found her place among the tribe's hunters where her height and strength were valued assets. There are many paths to belonging, she had told Kiona before the latter's joining ceremony. I have found mine, as you have found yours. Now, as the sacred fire burned bright against the gathering dusk, Kiona and Nantan-Gahas stood before the tribe, ready to formalize what the ancestors had already ordained. She wore a dress of softest deerskin, tiny beads catching the firelight like stars. He wore a ceremonial shirt commissioned from the tribe's most skilled seamstress, specially sized for his massive frame. Chief Mikado wrapped the unique joining blanket around them both, binding them together as White Hawk led the ancient prayers. The old medicine man's voice had grown stronger in recent weeks, as though the fulfillment of prophecy had renewed his life force. The smallest and the largest, he intoned, the high-reaching and the deep, seeing, together they create the medicine of balance that heals not just bodies but spirits. As the ceremony concluded, children approached, offering small gifts they had made them: carved animals, woven grass figures, painted stones. Once fearful of Nantan's enormous size, they now clambered for his attention, asking to be lifted high on his shoulders to see the world from eagle's view. The changes extended beyond the ceremonial. Since Nantan and Kiona had first joined hands at the statue, subtle transformations had rippled through the tribe and the land itself. Springs that had been drying now flowed more abundantly. Game returned to hunting grounds that had been growing sparse. Children who had suffered persistent coughs breathed easier. Gardens yielded more abundant harvests. The land responds to balance, Whitehawk explained to those who questioned these changes. When we honor all forms of strength, not just the obvious power of height and muscle, but also the quiet potency of wisdom and healing, we open channels for medicine to flow freely. In the gathering darkness after the ceremony, Kiona and Nantan walked hand in hand to the statue that had brought them together. Its gentle glow illuminated their path, stronger now, as if responding to their presence. I still do not fully understand why the ancestors chose us, Kiona said softly. A woman too small and a man too large by the usual measure. Nantan's deep voice rumbled gently in response. Perhaps that is precisely why. In our extremes, we demonstrate that there is no single right way to be. My size that once brought fear now protects. Your smallness that invited dismissal now allows you to notice what others miss. Kiona nodded, her free hand resting on the medicine pouch at her waist, larger now, to accommodate both her traditional remedies and the new ones they had discovered together. Different medicines for different needs. Neither lesser, neither greater. Balance, Nantan agreed, his enormous hand engulfing her tiny one with infinite gentleness. From the statue came a soft pulse of light, as though in affirmation, and from the canyon beyond, the evening wind carried whispers that might have been the voices of ancestors, satisfied that their long-ago vision had finally come to pass, the union of smallest and largest, bringing new strength to the people, a lesson in balance that would be told around fires for generations to come.